Go. Hello, Sri Swami. How are you doing?
Good, and you're doing good?
Yes, and now I have a big thing on the screen. Your internet connection is unstable. Well, I checked it with speed test, and this is the best Wi-Fi I got. So, too bad, people. Anyway, go ahead and
Yeah.
first of all, tell everybody what you just told me.
Oh yeah, I kind of just watched the episode on power today, reclaiming your power, and one of the things that Eric talked about was the different realms, and this is something we knew in our tradition that there are seven realms, and souls migrate from one realm to another depending on how they grow. So again, I just kind of wanted to validate some of the things that Eric talks about, which is what I've been saying. A lot of the stuff that Eric brings when it's him is
Yeah.
quite correct. And we knew that. We know that it's in our scriptures. It's something I've studied for many years, and I'm quite familiar with it. And just from another angle,
Yeah.
I'm saying that there is some validity to it. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and it was so cool. Anyway, so now we know he's not feeding us a lot of bull, but it was so cool going to his dimension and being able to sit on a bench with him and just, I mean, it was just awesome. So, but we're
Yeah.
going to talk
Right.
about Hinduism, which I
Right.
know very little about. I know there's something about cows, Brahmin cows or something. That's about it. Sorry.
People think Hinduism is about the caste system, and it's about cows. It's worshiping cows, and they discriminate against other people and things like that. But that's far from the truth.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
So
probably more of a socio-political thing than a.
yes, it was a system that was propagated by the British to control the Indian
Oh.
population. Okay, but let's back up a little bit to kind of give you an idea of where the term came from. Now, for instance, if you look at the Sanskrit language, or if you examine languages in India and all of the other dialects, which come to over 1,000 dialects that are in India, none of
Wow.
those dialects, none of those languages has the word Hindu in it. So if the word doesn't exist in any of the local languages, where did it come from?
Yeah.
So there was this river, which basically, because of the continental plates clashing, there was this huge river called Saraswati. You see it from the satellite imagery. You see the bed of that river. So that's where Pakistan is today. And Saraswati used to be one of the major rivers in parallel with the Indus River, which still exists till today. There was a civilization, a very, very advanced civilization, 4,000, 5,000, and beyond. In fact, they've just discovered, I think in 1920, there was this whole civilization called the Harappan civilization, and there are these ruins where they're backdating it using carbon dating all the way back to 7,000 years.
Wow.
Okay.
And when you say advanced, what do you mean? In what way?
I'm sorry?
When you say this was an advanced civilization, in what way were they advanced?
Okay. They were so advanced in so many ways. For instance, I'll give you a couple of examples. They have these writings, or actually they were oral tradition, which now are found in writings, which we call the Vedas. And they lived according to the Vedas. There's some of the stuff that I talk about or teach. When we talk about the health, for instance, the chakra system, where do we see the chakra system? Because if you digest the human body, you're not going to find it.
Yeah.
Okay. How did these guys know that there is a 7 chakra system? I mean,
Right.
you had other guests that have come here and they've talked about the 7 chakras. So where do you find them? If you dissect the human body, you're not going to find them. How did these guys know? Also, the astronomy that they knew. The Western astronomy is really based originally from the Indian astronomy, which came through the Arabs and the Greeks. Okay, so how did these guys know the movement of the planets, the size of the planets, the distances of the planets, 7,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, without the computers, without the telescopes that we have today. Okay, so we're talking, yeah, and then if you come fast forward 7,000 years later, or even 8,000 years later, which was about 450 AD, you had all these explorers going to India. You see, Columbus got lost. He's the confused guy that came to America and called the natives here Indians. What he was trying to do was to go to India.
Oh, and so really?
Yeah, that's why the Indians are called Indians. But the guy was confused.
I mean, he had high navigational skills for sure.
So this guy, and we celebrate Columbus Day because this guy came here and he killed more people than Hitler did. It's like the Germans celebrating Hitler, you know, and having a national day.
No, it's not good. Not good.
He wiped out at least 80 to 90% of the Caribbean island natives, and not to mention what happened in South America.
Was that due to diseases that they were not, I mean, mostly due to diseases they were not inoculated against, or?
No, it was, that's the least of it. That is the least of it. From this history, you'll find that what actually happened was the guy was going to India for all the wealth. There was silk, there was spices, there was food. So there were these spices, clothes, and all this gold. And so what happened is the guy got lost, comes across this the Caribbean island, says, "Oh, that's India." He looks at these brown people, calls them Indians, and then he's surprised. There's no silk, there's no spices. It's not as civilized as he thought it was. So he calls them savages. What he did find was that they had gold, and he knew that gold was necessary. So what happened was he would chop off people's hands, the natives' hands and legs, if they did not bring gold.
Oh, God. Oh.
He took a ship full of gold and took it back to the queen and said, "Hey, I found India, and look at all the gold I brought." You know what I mean? And we're celebrating him, you know, which is a total different story. But anyway, this is the same kind of thing that happened with colonials, you know, doing the same thing in India. So anyway, coming back to Hinduism, there was a culture or civilization that evolved, that functioned based on this concept that everything is one.
Okay. And is that what's about the root of the Vedic scriptures then?
Yes. So the root of Hinduism is the Vedic scriptures. Okay. And so what you had is you had a whole culture that lived on dharma. And what we mean by dharma is like living based on the principles of karma, which karma is action. That means you do something good, you get something good back. You do something bad, you know, somehow it comes back to you as a learning experience. It's not a negative thing. We should not look at it as a negative thing. Okay, so there's this whole culture that evolved based on these universal principles of oneness, which is what the Vedas really talk about. So, and this culture evolved because of the technology. They had a really, really sophisticated civilization. The numbering system that we use today came from India through Arabia. So we talk about astronomy, you talk about the chakra systems, you talk about Ayurveda, you talk about astrology. It was incredibly civilized and highly advanced, and you find evidence of it today. They're just discovering it as they excavate the Harappan sites. In fact, they're excavating, there's over 1,500 sites along the Saraswati River. And that, I said, is in Pakistan right now. So you can see it actually, if you go to Google, you'll find all that. Now, here's the thing. This river was so huge that the width was about 7 kilometers to, we could say about 7 to 10 miles, if you put it that way.
Wow.
So if you go back to the Indian language, if you go back to Sanskrit, if you look at the ancient scriptures, you will never find the word Hindu. What you're going to find is a term called Sindhu. Okay, now Sindhu means in Sanskrit and in other Indian languages, it means a large water body. It could be Gulf, it could be a river, it could be a huge lake, but we're talking about a huge thing. So
Yeah.
if you stood across and you went across one of the banks, you'd see a huge, vast river that was about maybe anywhere from 7 miles to 10 miles wide, you know. And this was the river, basically, all the snows of the Himalayas would come and drain into the ocean. And usually about spring, that's when it would be at its peak.
Okay,
So
if you stood on one bank, could you see the other bank?
very hard to
Yeah.
see.
I think it's
because,
12 miles. 12 miles.
Yeah, it was miles.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
But the thing is, there was a lot of communication because of the river that allowed a lot of trade to take place between the two civilizations that were along the banks of that river. Now, because the locals, like the local indigenous people, call the river Sindhu, because that's a large water body. They say, hey, that's a lake, right? And they had their local names. So what happened is the people who were neighboring, the civilizations that were neighboring the people who lived along the banks of river, those people ended up calling these people Sindhus. Now, here's the problem. The colony, the neighboring civilization, or you call the regions, belong to Afghanistan. So there's a tribe out there, and they still exist, but that tribe cannot pronounce S.
Oh.
So because they could not pronounce S, they ended up saying Hindu.
Oh, wow.
All right.
Fascinating. I love stories like this. Love it.
Yeah. So you have, I mean, this happens everywhere. You see, because of the local dialect, because you couldn't pronounce something, you end up chewing up words, and you end up chewing up some sounds. So these folks around the Iranian, what is today present-day Iran, they actually ended up calling the people, the indigenous people along that bank, along that huge river, as Hindu instead of Sindhu. Mm. Now comes the Mughal invasion. So the Mughals come in around, let's say, early 300 AD. This is basically, we're talking about like even BC, 5000 BC, 2000 BC, all the way to 1000 BC. Mm. But then the Mughals came in around 300 to 400 BC, somewhere around there. The Mongolians who came down, they're just, nomadic people, and they were running away from the cold. And basically it was like the Genghis Khan invasion. Yeah. Okay.
Well, okay. So, when you say Mughal, is that the same as Mongol?
Yes, they're the Mongols, and basically it was the Genghis Khan invasion that came down. Okay.
Yeah, I hear that a big portion of the population has his DNA. He was a little man whore. God.
He was. He was quite a force to reckon with. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so he came down Iran and Afghanistan, and then he realized that there was a really great culture that was really advanced. And as the more and more he talked, and everybody talked, it's like, all these, it's like present day, everybody wants to come to America. In those days, everybody wanted to go to India, for whatever. Right. So he goes, all the riches, all the civilization, all the advances are down by that river. So he then makes his way east, and then later on, he ends up colonizing India for many, many years, for almost 700 years. That was until the British came. Now, while they colonized India, they would call this place, because the Iranians called this place Hindu, the Mongolians or this civilization or this colonial, they called the whole Indian region as Hindustan.
Okay.
Okay. So Stan, basically, like you see Tajikistan and Pakistan, mm-hmm. Like all those regions that end up with Stan, the language Stan, the meaning of Stan means to stay.
Oh, okay.
To stay or a place. And this is basically, even in English, even in Sanskrit, till today, if you look at the root word or the root meaning of Stan is a place to stay. Okay. So you have Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, and so on, all of this. Yeah. That's how they name. So what they did is they started calling this place Hindustan. By the way, it's not 300 AD. It was 300 BC onwards. I think
Okay.
even earlier.
By the way, a lot of people say that my handwriting looks like Sanskrit.
Right.
So, doctor stuff. Okay.
Yeah, that's typical.
On.
That's the DNA of doctors.
Oh, God.
Or maybe it's the doctor's curse.
I think it's a curse, yes, for sure.
Yeah, it's worldwide, by the way. It's a worldwide phenomenon. Every doctor has met around the world.
I really try hard. I mean, people would have to probably wipe my brow to get me to keep on making it look. And I won a prize in 2nd grade for the best handwriting. Very short-lived thing. All right, go ahead.
That's right. That's right. Anyway, so the Mongols came in, and 300 BC was the Greek invasion. So basically, it was the Afghanistan. Then the Greeks came in, and that was around 300 BC. The Greeks couldn't pronounce H very well. So the Greeks, as they invaded India, they started calling India without the H.
Oh.
Okay. And then later on, because the locals were calling themselves Hindu from this time because of the Mongols' invasion through Afghanistan, they ended up calling Hindustan. So this Hindu thing started hanging over the Indians and the whole Indian subcontinent, which is Pakistan, Bangladesh today, including Afghanistan, by the way, and Burma, or today what they call Myanmar. They would call this whole region Hindustan. Yeah. Okay. Now, the British come in, and somehow this whole event is linked to the Boston Tea Party rebellion. So the British had a choice. They had a choice. They had X amount of army. They had they had X amount and Y amount of resources, and they saw what happened to this rebellion that happened in Boston, the Boston Tea Party, and at that time the Crown decided, well, we have a choice. We have all these resources. We either ship it to India or we ship it to America. And after deliberating on these two choices, they go, there's nothing in America. So they sent all their resources to India and left America for its independence. So this is the link, by the way.
Wow.
And because the resources went to India, they started ruling the whole Indian subcontinent for many, many years, for 200 years, basically.
How did they take over? I mean, how did the people of Hindustan allow that to happen?
Well, it was really insidious. Yeah. So basically, there was this corporation, and they still have an office. I actually saw that office in England recently. I was there, and it's called the British India Company. So this British India Company was really a company sponsored by the government. And what they were doing basically is they would go to India and they would buy tea and they would buy spices and they would buy all these other gadgets that they would bring back to the US. I mean, they bring back to the UK. So it was meant to be a trading, but then they just don't trade. I mean, the same British India Company actually came to America and they started trading here and colonizing the early part of Canada. Oh. They got kicked out. And because the government decided they want to focus on India, they just set up a company called British India Company and they started doing the trade. The problem is, in India, people did not steal. And your word of mouth was your contract because people didn't write. Yeah. But because they had this value for dharma or for righteousness, they knew that if I said something wrong, and if I gave you my word, there would be bad karma that would come and catch up with me. Okay, so this was a culture that lived that way.
I wish that was our culture now. Oh my gosh.
Exactly, and it was like that. In fact, even before the Muslim invasion. Now, because the British India Company worked on contracts, written documents, the Indians didn't know what they were doing. So this British India Company, there was a thug actually, a guy called John Macaulay.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, so he's considered Lord Macaulay. The way he was actually a guy who would break the showcases of the windows or shops of the local streets if the shop owners did not pay him money. That was his security.
Mm.
At some point, he committed a huge crime, and then he jumped on a ship as a stowaway, ended up in India.
Okay.
Now, of course, he was a white boy in India, and Indians have a culture that whenever a guest comes, they treat you like kings.
Mm.
So he was treated greatly because he was one of the visitors, and all the locals wanted to trade with the British India Company because they were bringing in money, and so they made these deals. Eventually, what happened is then they started colonizing the entire India, and then they kicked away the Muslim rulers.
Yeah.
And that's how they kind of rule the world,
Mm.
So as they ruled the world, the British India Company started losing its business. Then the government then eventually just took over. And that's how the British took over the whole region.
Mm.
Now, but it was insidious because what you'll see that Lord Macaulay had made statements that he said, one of the things that he said he's traveled around India all over and he's realized that the education that was prevalent in India was nothing compared to what they had in UK, and so he deliberately wanted to say that these people were savages and they knew nothing, and we needed to convert them to Christianity.
Yeah. Mm.
And so that's how the insidious incursion started. And this is what happened is that basically when the British came in, they destroyed India in a way no other colonial civilization did.
God.
And what they deliberately did was to completely destroy every form of education and knowledge and techniques that the Indians used.
But they wanted them to stay uninformed.
Exactly, so that they could control them. Now, one of the things that happened is, as you recall, the British, they say that the sun never set in the British Empire, which is true.
Yeah.
And India was one of the big part where they were milking India for all its resources, gold and wealth, and that's how they survived for a long time. Yeah. Now, in 1857, there was a rebellion. As there was here in 1779 here, there was a similar rebellion in India. They decided to squash it. The way they tried to squash it is they needed to understand and they needed to do a census. So here's where the problem began. They start doing a census and they started saying, okay, well, there are all these Christians and they put them into one category. And then they put everyone who's not a Christian as Hindus because they're Indians. They didn't know any better. Now they talk to the Portuguese, and the Portuguese are ruling some parts of India. There's like about 4 parts, like Goa, there's Pondicherry, and a few islands. And they couldn't understand this sort of like this segregation that took place within the Indian culture.
Yeah.
What we today call the caste. But caste is not an Indian word. It's a Portuguese word.
Oh.
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing. The British talk to the Portuguese and say, what's going on with these Indians? And the Portuguese say, well, they're divided into caste. Now, what does that really mean? Okay. According to the Indian fabric, the caste was not layered in a hierarchy that we see today. It was based entirely on the predisposition and the constitution of the person. So for instance, if you want to be an athlete, or let's say you want to be a defender in football, in American football, you kind of need to have a really stocky, strong body.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot be a scrawny little
linebacker. No.
A 5-foot librarian,
No.
and say I'm going to be the defender, right? So basically, there were we all, human beings presently included, is that we have, our bodies are made up of certain constitution. We have a predisposition, not only in our physical sense, but we have a mental predisposition and an affinity to do certain things. Some of us want to be intellectuals. Some of others want to be athletes. Some of them want to be martial artists and dancers and things like that.
Yeah.
So based on your constitution, based on your physical constitution, the society was divided in a way that you could choose anything you wanted based on your constitution.
But who decides how to categorize the person?
They themselves.
Oh, I see. And
So,
why did they start this? I don't understand.
okay, and so the British then came in and they look, oh, okay, because one of the things that the British did is divided and conquered. You hear this so much, that the way
Yeah.
they rule the world is they divided and conquered. So what they did then is they go, oh, well, all the Indians living from all the way from Afghanistan to Myanmar and Thailand, they're all Hindus
Mm.
because the Islamics call them Hindustan. The
Mm-hmm.
Portuguese then said, well, they're broken into all these categories, which they didn't quite understand. Caste is a Portuguese word, not an Indian word, not an English word. Okay. So what then the British decided to do in their census was they started breaking down these castes that were familiar. And there was only 4. Okay.
Okay.
And so basically you had 4. Now, as they were developing these categories for the census, the Muslims came in and said, hey, wait a minute, we're not Hindus. Why are you putting us into a Hindu category? Okay. All right. So they create another one for the Muslims. Then the Jains and the Sikhs come in and they say, no, wait a minute, we're not Hindus. So it was basically anyone who was not a Christian, not a Jew or a Muslim was a Hindu.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it wasn't a religion, it was a culture, the way people lived. For instance, today we can say, why are the Vikings not a religion? Why don't we call Vikingism as a religion? Or Hopiism, or Lakotaism, or Suism. So that's the problem, is that it was a culture that had a certain value system that was not based on a book or a person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it was just a culture,
Right. It was not a religion. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So now what's happening is because of this census system, people started saying, no, we are not Hindus. And so you had an elimination process and this increased category. In the meantime, while every group goes to the British and say, hey, wait a minute, we're not Hindus, the British are happy because the more they can divide, the better for them.
Divide and conquer.
Right? It's like they fell into their plate, right?
Oh, gosh.
Now, once you had the system there in place, the British then brought their class system, because if you look at the British hierarchy, you have the lords and then
the serfs, yeah.
Exactly. So they imported that class system and imposed it within the Indian structures.
Mm.
And so now today, present India says, oh, I'm a Brahmin, so I'm a higher caste. I'm Kshatriya, I'm a higher caste, and so on. And they added one other factor, which is the untouchables.
Oh, I know.
Untouchables is an English word. It's not an Indian word.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they bring in and they categorize 5 and they break this hierarchy. In fact, there was a lot of complaints when they started putting this hierarchy, like, oh, this class is the first and this class is the second. So you found that there was a lot of competition and infighting. But then the British, because they were ruling, they kind of set it up. So this
they took advantage of all that infighting, I'm sure. Yeah.
Exactly. So basically what happened was you have a division of society for the benefit of society, then converted and transposed by the class hierarchy that was imported by the British and then superimposed on the Indian tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was the fundamental problem. Now, here's the other problem. When you are a kid in a schoolyard and your friends are going out and say, hey, I'm a Christian, I have Jesus, and so on. And then you have a Muslim guy and he says, I have a Muhammad, and we have a Quran, and the Christian guy says, I have a book. What does a Hindu say? It's like, okay, who's our God? It's like, do we have these deities with 12 arms, and that's not human, and that's not so cool? And then you had all these different images. And so you'd find that Hinduism over time, because of the colonial rule, started feeling more inferior. And this is a classic case with every country that's been colonized.
Yes.
And they want to be more colonial. And so what has happened is, after independence, the ruling party did not really take on the Hindu values. What they did was it took the British class system, and all that happened in India was that you had the white guys get replaced by the brown guys, mm-hmm. but the whole infrastructure still continued.
Well, still there, yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's still there till today. Okay, so basically, people don't understand that Hinduism is not, first of all, a religion. It's a
Yes.
culture.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's a culture, though that culture was based on the principle of oneness.
Yeah.
It was a way to live in a way that was righteous,
Mm-hmm.
that was kind and loving, with full of love and compassion, accepting people the way they are because of their fundamental constitution, physical constitution, mental constitution, and emotional constitution. So it was a way of living and accommodating without excluding anyone.
Yeah.
Okay, so it functioned until the colonials came in. Now they started imposing their own values and corrupting the society. That's a whole different, story. But basically, what then the British started doing is converting these group of people that they call Hindus,
Mm-hmm.
and they started assigning or attributing negative values based on their perspectives, and
Like
they were
what?
doing that
For
to
example?
suppress Hindus,
Oh,
to suppress Indians. So then they started writing books or propagating the information that Hindus are basically the cow-worshipping people who are racist and discriminatory towards their own kind and avoid the untouchables.
Even though they're the ones that imported this caste system, the hierarchy.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, there are books still today in California that actually describe Hinduism this way. You have the Jesus, you have the Christianity described this way beautifully. You have Islam described beautifully, Judaism beautifully. But then when it comes to Hinduism, you find books today in high school or in elementary school in California and other parts, in other states, actually describe Hinduism in this way. So there is a group that's trying to revive it and correct that misunderstanding.
Good.
Yeah.
Oh, what is the religion there? Just the Veda?
Okay.
I mean, besides,
Okay.
of course, you have the Christians and the Muslims and all that stuff, but other than those.
Okay, so here I'll explain how it works. It's not religion the way we understand it. First of all, religion is a concept, it's a term, it's a Latin word that actually comes from religio. Okay, and it was created by this Roman emperor called Cicero.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, he wasn't an emperor. He was actually one of the greatest speakers at that time, a greatest philosopher during first AD.
Mm-hmm.
This was a Roman creation, the term religio. So some people say if you look at in Latin, re, simply means again, to revisit, to reinvent, to recreate. Okay. So and then there's a whole philosophical term with legos, which comes from the Greeks, from a Hellenistic language. But then if you say re, religio, that could also mean a concept, to revisit a concept, to revisit a state. Okay. And so what happened was at that time, that word religio got converted in religare, which is actually used in Latin languages, including Italian, which again, modern philosophers convert that term to mean reconnecting with God.
Okay. But
then, if we go back to the first history, first AD, during the Roman time, religio did not mean religion. It was not based on faith. Here's the key thing, that religio was not based on faith. It was based on knowledge. And because the higher class had a particular knowledge, because who gains knowledge?
Yeah, the ones that are educated, can read, yeah.
Exactly. It was the Senate. It was the higher class. It was those people who had the luxury to read. Okay, it's like today, if you can afford $1,000 iPhone, you have that privilege, right? Yeah. So there were these guys who could afford to read and write, and because they had knowledge, and the Roman culture was based on this wisdom, on knowledge, what they did is they created certain practices, certain social practices, and these social practices became ritualistic. But there was a social order, just very much like 5,000 years ago. Prior to that, the Indian culture had a social order, okay? Yeah. Because you wanted to create a society that is harmonious. And in order to have a society that is harmonious, you need to have some rules. Like we have rituals, the way we drive in America.
Oh, yeah.
We have a ritual, driving on the right. If you go to England, they drive on the left. Okay.
No, they drive on the wrong, not the right.
That's right. They're right. They drive on the wrong side. You know? So that's the point. So because they came up with a ritual, that ritual, which was that process, which was ritualized, was called religio. Later on, people then started converting that into connection. So today, religion is completely faith-based and not knowledge-based, which it has changed. So we cannot say that the Hindu culture or the Hindu way of life is based on a faith, because their understanding. Okay, today maybe there's a lot of faith involved, there's a lot of rituals involved, so you could say that Hinduism is a religion today, but it is based on the fundamental understanding that we're all one. Mm-hmm. Okay, not only that, Hinduism is based on the fact that if we're all one, how do we make sense of it? Because I'm talking to people, I have emotions, and I see the difference between you being there and I'm being here, and you know, if you say something horrible, I get upset and things like that. How do you make sense of that? How do you make sense of Saddam Hussein or someone who kidnaps your child and hurts you or kills your brother or kills your child? How do you say that that person is one with you?
You have to have the concept of dharma or karma.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, so the Vedas, especially Vedanta, there's a section called Vedanta, which actually describes a way to see that. You see it with your mind, with your mind's eye. Okay, there's a teaching, and this is one of the teachings that I teach, is basically how to get you to see the oneness. Okay, that's pretty much what I do most of the time. Now, having seen this oneness, you also appreciate the diversity. Okay, and you make sense of it. Now, the way I try to describe this, for instance, when you turn on the light switch, you have electricity show up in the appliance. We do not see electricity.
Yeah.
Okay. Electricity comes from a major source, maybe a dam, or maybe a solar panel or something, but somewhere far away. And that electricity is generated somewhere else and transported to your home devices. Now, if you look at the intellectual engineering necessary to actually design something to take energy from a dam far away and bring it to your iPhone, that intellectual understanding is huge.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Yeah. So electrical engineers actually do that. Electronic engineers actually do that. They know how to bring something that is not visible, something that is not tangible. Of course, if you put your finger in it, then you get a shock.
That way, yeah, really.
But other than that, you do not see it, right? So that energy, taking that energy from a faraway source and bringing that energy to your iPhone, okay, requires highly sophisticated engineering and design. Okay, now, in all the work you've been doing in terms of your conversations with Eric and everything else that goes on, particularly in this channel, we are specifically talking about energy in every aspect.
True.
You know, people are connecting with Eric's energy. Energies. You have talked to Jesus. You have talked to all kinds of beings that came and went from more recent to 5,000 years ago. Or you talked to Buddha. I know you talked to Jesus, which was 2,000 years ago. So what are we talking? Who are they talking to? They're talking to an energy. Now. And this morning we talked about, you know, what you just posted about the power is that you have these other realms that has their energy.
Yeah, higher and higher vibrations, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
They're high and higher vibrations, and that's why. So these higher and higher vibrations are realms. We're in a more dense realm, in a lower vibration. That's why we incarnate here for a purpose.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have to have that density to get that polarity, that contrast.
Absolutely. Not only that, okay, if we're going to say this is all woo-woo stuff, Einstein proved in his equation of relativity, E equals mc squared, which says that everything is energy.
Yeah.
Okay, in case you doubt that it's not energy, right? So if energy exists And this energy is feeling, is love, is emotions, is intelligence,
Thoughts, is it a
thoughts,
form of energy?
all of
Yeah.
these are energy, right? So all these energy has a way to function. Hinduism is like the engineering, electrical engineering that brings electricity from a dam to your iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
Hinduism, as we know it today, is all about managing that energy that is not seen.
Mm.
It's about managing the universal energies that is not seen. So, for instance, we know the energies in a human being. There are 7 chakras. Okay, it says that.
Yeah.
It also says that there's 70,000 channels within your body that you cannot find.
Wow.
But it works because those 70,000 channels are like highways and byways and secondary roads that connect to the 7 chakras.
Mm.
Okay, this same energy is connected to the stars and the planets and the galaxies. This same energy is the one that tells us about the size of the universe. This same energy also tells us how energy works around our planet.
Mm.
How the whole concept of feng shui is something that we have in the Indian culture, which is called Vastu, which tells us how do you align your body within the energy of your house.
Yeah.
Okay, so you go on and on and on, and this is all there. It's written. It's something I've studied.
Now,
So
is
not
it
something
written
that
in the Vedic scriptures?
right.
Okay, is there a book that we can read, like
No.
Vedic scriptures for
okay.
dummies? Anything that we can read? Really?
No, basically, all the stuff that's written, first of all, is misrepresented. And this is one of the things I'm doing. I travel around the world talking to people about this stuff. It's not written. I'm kind of trying to work on it to present it the way I just presented. So that's one. 2, you cannot read a book because those books, what's written in the Vedas are formulas. So if you say E equals mc squared, what does that mean to anyone unless you're a physicist? You can totally understand what that means, right? So if you're going to read one of these Vedic scriptures, you're going to read E equals mc squared. Now you need someone who's trained to expound on that.
And that is you.
And to translate.
You need to write the book. You need to write the book making sense of the Vedic scriptures in a way that we could apply it to our life and our thoughts and our emotions and everything.
Yeah, and that's actually, that's my big project for next year.
Yeah.
Which is what I was talking about. How should we learn to love? Because love is a way, it's a transaction. Yeah. And how do we love? How do we learn to love? Because we really don't know how to love.
Yeah.
And how do we use love as a transaction in this realm within the understanding of oneness? Yeah.
Wow.
And that's the project that I'm trying to work in.
So important. Oh, wow. That is a big work.
It is, yeah. I haven't even started yet. I'm just talking.
You're like, oh, God, do I really want to start this? You're looking at Mount Everest. Okay.
Exactly.
One step at a time. Before you go on, in case I forget, can you tell me how to spell that town by that river?
If you just Google Saraswati civilization.
How do you spell that one?
Okay, SARASWATI.
Okay.
The river. You kind of have to say Saraswati River or Saraswati civilization, because we have a deity that is Saraswati.
Okay. Okay. So I don't want to Google that, but okay. So now, real quick, because I have this on my list. Why were these the ones near this river so advanced? Did they have knowledge that was brought in by aliens? Maybe.
Right. So the Vedic knowledge, when we say Veda, right, that whole body of knowledge, it's a body of knowledge. It's not a book.
Oh, okay.
It's a body of knowledge. Like, for instance, if you take all knowledge that we know today that's taught in every university, okay, you cannot put all of that knowledge in a book.
No.
Okay. So, I mean, you know the medicine world very well. So if you take every specialist, okay, I mean, for the eye, just for the eye, you need about 10 specialists.
Oh gosh, yeah. Several
Okay.
books, right.
Exactly. So this body of knowledge was given, it was channeled, and thus the difference.
Oh, okay.
Because there's no way that the human mind can see those planets and the stars.
Yeah, there's
and
no way.
To figure out the distances, to figure out the size, and to figure out all these things that's going on, including right down on Earth here. How do we see the 7 chakras? Or how do we see the channels in our body? How do we all made up? So basically, because that culture around 7,000, even 10,000, I go back to 15,000 years. This is 7,000 is what they've just discovered. But I have evidence that these cultures existed 15,000 years before today, or before even Christ, that these civilizations actually received this information because of the Sanskrit language. For instance, the words in English does not lend itself to certain concepts like karma or dharma, and so on. It goes on and on, right? But in the Sanskrit language, the way it's structured, it's incredibly versatile in the sense that just the way a painter uses the 7 colors to make a painting, and you see the painting and you appreciate it and you get it, a person speaking in that language creates words that's not even in the dictionary.
Oh, wow.
And you create as you go, which becomes incredibly colorful and very, very descriptive. So they use words to paint a painting, and you get to see
so Sanskrit is oral and written then.
Today it's written,
but
more recently. Back then it was entirely oral.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So the whole body of knowledge was actually transmitted in an oral tradition, was transmitted orally from the parents to the child, and so on. And that's how it was preserved. Okay. So you transmitted not the unfoldment of that teaching, you've transmitted the formulas like E = MC².
Yeah.
You just have to memorize that. Then you have a teacher to unfold it. Right?
I see.
So because this vision for humanity, by the way, it's not exclusive to the Indian people or that subcontinent. This information is available for the entire humanity. Yeah. Okay.
And it's from ET, from aliens.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. They transmitted this knowledge to what we call these sages.
Okay.
And these sages in the Indian language or in the Sanskrit language, we call them rishis. And these sages then formulated these concepts into the Sanskrit language, and then it was transmitted without corruption. Oh. And so that's how we get it today. And that's why today, now you can imagine all the things that have come and gone just in our times. But there is this lineage, which I'm part of, that this teaching from time immemorial comes down through a teacher and a disciple for thousands of years. So what I bring and what I teach is based on a teaching that's 20,000 years old, or sometimes 15,000 years old. So, but we cannot go there because the only evidence we have here in the modern day is the carbon dating of this civilization, which goes back to about 7,000 years. But what
did aliens want from us? I mean, why did they do this?
To help us, because we're not very smart.
I know. We're gonna do it. No, I mean, seriously, what's in it for them? Why help us?
They get good karma.
Oh, okay.
And so this is how the whole universe works, right? And Eric will validate this, is that because these alien beings or ancient beings help us for our own good, right? That they then get elevated to another realm.
Oh, I see.
Okay. So it is in their vested interest, like for instance, our guides. When we talk to our angels or higher self and our guides that are with us, they are serving Earth for our benefit. They don't get anything. The other thing is that the only thing is after having served people for so long, they get an upgrade and they move to higher realms, but that's about it.
Frequent flyer miles.
They get frequent flyer miles. That's
there we
right.
go. That is so cool. I love the part about the aliens. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, there's some great movies that have come out where, they talk about the aliens coming in to help human beings, and that's the same concept.
Yeah.
The
Wow.
thing is, because we're stuck in duality, we cannot see
I know.
the other realms, and we do not know the other realms. So what
We're
happened
too low
was,
in our vibrational frequency.
exactly. So in order for us to come here and take advantage of this great opportunity of being incarnated in this duality, so we can learn the lessons we need to learn,
Yeah.
these angels gave us this information. And we then have to take this information and bring it out to people in the right way, so that people can also benefit from it and then transform their lives and live according to Dharma.
I wish we could all do it. Oh, we need to spread this. And you can help. You can help. You guys need to go check him out. Sri Swami Svatmananda. I will put the title. Did I say it wrong?
Slightly, but it's Swatmananda.
Swatmananda.
There you go. You did it.
Let me. Okay. Swatmananda. I'm going
to shorten that because nobody will get it.
No, it builds character. But I'm kind of slow and forgetful. One other question I had. God. One other thing you said that such and such got that information via the Arabs. So, so were the Arabs first to what?
So basically, this is how it worked, right? I mean, in the olden days, there were no airplanes, so people would have to either walk, or take a mule, or take a boat, or sail, in a dhow. Yeah. So there was these National Geographic documentaries, and they were doing a review of the Ramesses 4000 BC. And that whole culture. So you find that a lot of the civilization and the knowledge that was in the Indian subcontinent, because it was not only excluded to these rivers that we're talking about, it actually spread all the way down south. And if you go down to Cambodia, you'll see these great temples in Thailand. So you find that some of this knowledge actually traveled east, far east. But Westerners, they did not know anything that existed beyond the Indus River. And so when Westerners, like meaning Europeans or Arabs, wanted to go east, they had to actually also go through the Khyber Pass, which was one of the most dangerous places to go through. It's one of the arduous and incredibly hard path to go. It's narrow, it's mountainous, and so you find that even Alexander lost a lot of his men during going through the Khyber Pass.
What did Genghis Khan make it through there?
Well, Genghis Khan did, but he was ruthless and mean. I know. And he took a lot of time. So just the way Alexander did. But Alexander had a lot of heavy equipment that he was able to go through there. Genghis Khan did not have a lot of heavy equipment. He just
screwed his way through the mountain pass.
So he had knives, and he just slaughtered everyone that came in his path,
Okay.
So that was a little different time. So basically, what happened then is that Westerners, including more recent times until 1800s, went east for knowledge. Even if you look at the Jesus story, 3 wise men from the east.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so the East is where all this great wisdom was and knowledge was. And these 3 white men were basically astrologers who knew the alignment of the planets, that there was going to be a boy born who's going to change the world.
Wow, God.
And they used astrology to come down and find where Jesus was born. Yeah. So it's astrology at work. But these wise men actually knew this whole they had this knowledge, and that's what we're talking about, that even the Greeks, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, they got this information from India. Now I'll tell you how. Well, National Geographic did a documentary a few years ago that talked about the Ramesses period, which we're talking about Ramesses the first, which is like around 4000 BC, who actually took this knowledge from India. And there's evidence, because National Geographic shows that there was trade between India and Samaria and Mesopotamia and Egypt. And in fact, some of these old kingdoms, they would go to India and capture these wise men or these knowledgeable people and their families, and and if they did not share the knowledge, they would kill their family members.
God.
So some of the knowledge, a lot of this knowledge actually then got brought to Middle East.
Yeah.
Particularly in Sumeria. And in Sumeria and Mesopotamia, we're talking about 2500 BC. In Egypt, it was 4000 BC. So then you find all this knowledge coming out there. If you look at the Egyptian heliographs, they actually talk about some of the wisdom that comes from these. The problem is the people who are reading the heliographs today do not understand what they really mean, because they don't understand this body of knowledge of oneness.
Oh, yeah. Well,
so
the aliens, why did they choose India? Or was it not just India to upload all this information? Because wasn't there some alien, uploading information to the Egyptians, the pharaohs, and other different places? Maybe the Mayans, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. They did not choose India. If you look at the pyramids, and I kind of traveled and visited the ancient cultures. So I'll tell you, all of the ancient cultures had more in common than we do with our ancestors. So if you look at the Hopi culture, you look at the Lakotas, you look at the Sioux, you look at the Aztecs, the Incas, the Mayans, the Aborigines, and also the early Asian cultures up in the northern China parts, you'll find that they all had built pyramids. But aside that, okay, if you look at the cultures, all of these cultures were based on these teaching of oneness. You talk to the shamanic people, they'll tell you that we're all. You talk to the Aborigines today, they'll tell you we're one. I mean, there's hardly any difference, okay? What's different is the form or the rituals that are different. Now, we find this when Eric is trying to talk to us, okay, through a channeler, there is a filtration going on between Eric and the channeler.
Of course.
So the channeler filters what Eric wants to say. So we're not getting 100% Eric.
No.
Okay, and we can say that because there's a frustration. The channeler can only say something based on what he or she knows rather than what Eric is trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting a filtered version of what Eric is.
Some less filtered than others, but yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. But it's filtered partly because of the language.
Yes. That's what he says all the time. It's very frustrating to him because he says that we just don't have the vocabulary to understand a lot of what he wants to convey.
Absolutely. And this is why other civilizations were not able to receive the information in the right way, because the language was a handicap.
Yeah.
The mindset was a handicap. Now here, if you look at Sanskrit, the language, the way it was created, the way the Sanskrit works, is that you can create words I can create words that you can never find in the dictionary, but you would understand exactly because you know the structure of Sanskrit. And it's, in fact, there's no dictionary in the Sanskrit language. What we have is 2,000 roots. So you kind of have
match. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have 2,000 roots, and then with those 2,000 roots, you do a prefix and a suffix, you create a word.
Yeah.
Right? So the aliens or these angels would transmit something, they would create a word, and the person who's a channeling would say the word, and then they would unfold the meaning of that word.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So because of the sophistication of the Sanskrit language, the Indians were able to capture it. Not only that, they were able to preserve it uncorrupted.
Yeah.
Generation through millenniums.
That's awesome. But it's like playing operator, that little where you whisper something to one person, by the time it gets to the last person, it's completely different.
Exactly. And this is the biggest problem. I mean, this happens in a room. Now imagine this happening over thousands of years.
Yeah. Oh, God.
What was written and said by Jesus doesn't necessarily come down to us to say that that's exactly what he said.
So he says 80% of the Bible is incorrect.
It is. And it was rewritten by King Constantine in 300 AD.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
to
right.
control so you find terms like reincarnation, you find things about ghosts, other things are all eliminated by King
Yes.
Constantine.
Right. Right.
So,
Mediumship. Wow.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And then they had 600 years of Inquisition that wiped out every channeler
Right.
and every possible person who was remotely connected to our angels. You
Well, it almost seems like we need a part two. You're just a font of information. You saw my jaw every once in a while. I go, wow.
know.
So this is awesome. And
Yeah.
you want to tell anything to the viewers of how you can help them if they go to
Yeah.
your site? And I'll put that down. It's www.svatmanda, but I'll put it here. Don't worry about it.
Right. No, basically, what I do is I also do Indian astrology, where we look at your lifespan and give you a roadmap of your life and how to take those turns and when to take those turns. And so I've had a few people that have contacted me, not many, and because my fee is actually $200, so otherwise I don't have time to do it. Kind of doing it more as a help.
Yeah,
so,
right. Oh my God, and it's so elaborate. I think everybody should get it done. You want the key map to your life, people. Seriously.
I know. I mean, you use a GPS to go to the grocery store. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and you
Pretty
pay
life.
more than $200 for a GPS upgrade in the car. Jesus.
Right.
Anyway, all right. Well, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank
And
you.
if people have questions, they can post it on your comment section, and then we'll try to do a part 2 and incorporate that. Also, if they want to hear anything, because I can pretty much talk about anything really, especially in the outer world.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome.
On this world, I know quite a bit on this realm, the earthly realm too, because of my work here. But I also know quite a bit in the other realms, and I can explain it in a way that is concrete and very substantial.
I know, and you give metaphors, you give examples. I love it. Good, you're a great teacher.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Happy Thanksgiving. I don't know if you celebrate.
You too. Happy Thanksgiving. And you to your new baby, by the way. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.